Hello, I'm Kevin Hong. I'm a partner at LYC Partners, an executive search and leadership advisory firm. I'm also the co-founder of The Council, a private network for senior executives. And this is Leaders in Motion. Today, I'm with Cedric Delzenne, an executive who has spent 20 years in international business across multiple countries, France, Denmark, Brazil, and the US, and more than 15 years in Hong Kong, where he's now a permanent resident. He's been an entrepreneur and more recently, the most recent managing director, APAC of 55. Cedric, welcome to Leaders in Motion.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me.
We usually let our guests introduce themselves and also their journey. What I'd like you to tell me more in particular, out of my own curiosity, is you're French and you ended up in Hong Kong. So how did that happen?
I've been in Hong Kong for 15 years, very much calling it home. So that's where my family is. That's where my son was born. And it has been a really, really interesting journey. Before that, I was actually working in Paris in a management consulting firm called Group. And honestly, I had a pretty good start of a career, and I could have been there still, but I decided otherwise. I think that the main reason is curiosity at the time. So that was back in 2010. I thought that something was happening in this part of the world. And I met someone who is now my and we had a similar, plan in terms of putting ourselves in a bit of a risky place, moving to Hong Kong without a job and see if we could make to today. I think it's been my best decision ever, really.
Career and most importantly, life is made by choices and decisions. Were there something that you planned or something that step by step you built over time?
Good question. It's very much about who you meet along that journey. So I graduated from a French business school called APAC and started my career actually in the US. And I had to move back to Paris. It was already at the time quite difficult to get a visa in the US. I very much enjoyed my time there. And it was actually my first job in a tech startup. I worked in San Francisco for what was at the time quite innovative, a startup designing and manufacturing and selling Bluetooth accessories for the iPhone. And that's really where I got the bug, I think, in terms of, my interest for everything tech. So moving back to Paris, I joined a more traditional management consulting firm, as I said. I spent about 2 years there. It was very good. I mean, very good training, I would say, as a fresh grad. I learned a lot in a very short time frame. But yeah, as I said, it wasn't really where I would see myself 10, 15, 20 years from then. And so that's why I decided to move to Hong Kong. I took a sabbatical from my consulting firm and never went back. When I moved to Hong Kong, I realized it was the right place and the right time to actually launch my own business. And that's what I did. As you know, as probably a lot of the audience know, it's pretty straightforward to launch a business in Hong Kong, pretty low cost. And it's still very much the case today. And yeah, off we go. I had this new concept in mind of selecting emerging fashion designers that were a little famous in their home country, and through digital and e-commerce, I would help them grow onto new markets. So that's what I did, raised a bit of seed money, was joined by a couple of co-founders as well. It was an emotional roller coaster, as many startups can be. But again, it was an amazing opportunity to learn probably about many mistakes that people do when they launch a business. So I did that for about three and a half years until I realized that, honestly, that the business as I envisioned it wasn't going anywhere. And I decided to pass the torch to my co-founders. Right after that, because also I was starting to have a pretty good network in the tech scene in Hong Kong and Greater China and also the region, I was contacted by Adeo Ressi, who is the creator or the director of Founder Institute. So In a few words, Founder Institute helps people with their first-time entrepreneurial journey. Typically, people who are working in the corporate environment and, same as me, are willing to take the leap of faith into tech entrepreneurship. And it's a program that still exists. It's very well structured, quite demanding, and it helps you to confront your idea, your concept to the market with actual customers and go through all of the the little details, all of the little steps that you need to go through as a startup founder: legal, marketing, pitching for sure, raising funds, and the like. So that was a really good program, and I would highly encourage anyone who is keen to launch a business with a more corporate background to go through this program. It's called Founder Institute. Okay, so during that time, because I had built a name in e-commerce and especially fashion e-commerce in China and Greater China, I was invited at a conference in Paris called China Connect to actually demystify what was happening in China at the time, and that was 2014, I think. So Alibaba was all the rage, and senior directors and leaders in Europe were starting to hear about what was happening here. And at this event, there was one of the co-founders of 55. I'll tell you a bit about what we do in a minute, but we had a really good chat after the event. They were willing to expand to APAC. I think they like my entrepreneurial background. I had been in Asia for quite a while, the network that I had, and I guess the resilience that I had built already. And so, a couple of months later, they hired me to open their first office in the region in Hong Kong, and that's how this journey started.
You were among the first employees in the region, and you had to build a team. So I guess it also included a touch of entrepreneurship in a way. So maybe you can tell us more the beginning of that adventure.
You summarized it very well. I think the reason I took on this challenge is because it merged everything that I liked from a professional standpoint. It was very entrepreneurial indeed, but at the same time, I wasn't starting from scratch. The company already had, I think, 3 or 4 years of existence. Already some very good customers in EMEA. So a proven expertise, I would say, a strong nascent brand, and I was basically in charge of building the product and the company in APAC. And we'll certainly talk about that in a minute, but APAC is certainly one of the most complex region to launch and scale a business.
And this is what we hear, and most people do feel and believe this it is, but some also would like to know, more practically speaking, why is it that complex and what does it mean?
One of the common mistakes or misconceptions from foreign leaders is that APAC is just one big market. In reality, it is what I call a kaleidoscope of cultures and languages and certainly currencies and ways of doing business. And certainly seen from 10,000 kilometers away, CEOs would tend to only look at your sales pipe and your traction and your momentum that you built as a whole. But actually, it's simply not enough. And I think it's, as a regional director, you need to take the time to explain at the market level what's happening, because there's also various level of maturity when it comes to tech and digital transformation, and certainly and so this is sometimes quite a subtlety that is hard to grasp from Europe or the US headquarters.
Why is it hard, in your opinion, since it seems now that APAC is a leading region economically speaking, and also in terms of technology? And why do you think it's still so hard today?
First of all, the region is evolving very, very fast. There's certainly a lot of discussion about China at the moment with generative AI especially, and their massive investment and their very peculiar open source approach, and certainly the technology competition that is happening with the US. But other markets in the region are also influenced by that, right? And they have a lot of potential for foreign companies as well if you know your game, pretty much. Let me give you an example, perhaps. A few years ago, we decided to open an office in Singapore, and it seems to be the default hub for a lot of American and European firms when they open an office in the region. Well, if you don't, if you haven't been through opening an office in Hong Kong, in Taipei, in Singapore, for that matter, then you wouldn't necessarily know how expensive it can be to open an office in Singapore, how complicated it can be to simply open a bank account at the moment or to get a work visa. And also the fact that you can simply not serve Southeast Asia from Singapore alone because of how expensive salaries have become. That wasn't necessarily the case 10 years ago, but it's clearly a challenge now. And so, yes, HQs in the US or Europe might still think, okay, we're going to go with the path of least resistance. And Singapore seems to be that way. But it's actually not necessarily the case when you have all of the knowledge and the experience at your disposal, I think.
You're obviously talking about AI and also the competition, the technological competition between China and the US. And well, I'd like to know also your opinion about why Europe is not so much in that in that race. And what do you think boards or CEOs in global leadership companies should know about what is coming or what is being done in China related to AI? What are the misconceptions you see that people still read what is happening in China when it comes to AI with a Western lens, but potentially how can you help them decode what is happening?
The best way for them to really understand what's happening is actually to spend time, like physical time in the country, embedded with clients and partners in Shanghai, in Shenzhen, and probably other cities as well. That's actually something that I did a number of times when I was at 55. So bringing them to the region for proper roadshows with, meetings all the time. And also, spending a bit of quality time with the team as well, so they could have this first-hand experience about what was happening on the front lines. I think that's really important. To answer your question about this gap of knowledge, I think that it still exists in HQ or European or American HQs. I think honestly, maybe I shouldn't say that, but the media are not helping. The approach of China to generative AI and LLMs, as I mentioned, is very much open source, and they have taken this very different approach from their American competitors, who are just about aggressive market share acquisition. Right in China, the strategy is very much top down. As we know, there might be a lot of companies working on similar topics for a while. It can be, supported / subsidized. We've seen that in EVs for sure. But after a while, then a few very strong companies would emerge and they would go global. I think that's the plan. It has been the plan with EVs. It has been the plan with solar. It has been the plan with windmills and the like. So that's the usual path for China. There's also this misconceptions I believe about data security when using LLMs or Chinese LLM, but there's certainly ways to mitigate that by deploying Chinese LLM on-prem. So that I don't think that's a valid point. It's certainly a concern that the media have perpetuated for its valid reasons. But I think with AI costs going through the roof at the moment, we might see Chinese LLMs gaining a lot of traction in the coming few months. And actually, they might not be the most frontier, the most the best ones in terms of pure performance. But to be honest, most use cases don't require that type of frontier model.
Interesting. I mean, you've been working on that topic at 55. What do you see? What do you see are the opportunities and the risk of international companies when it comes to adopting AI overall, as in generally speaking? How do you compare them to the adoption of AI with their Chinese counterparts, Chinese competitors, and what do you think that they should know in order to get up to speed and also adopt and embrace not only AI but also potentially what's coming from the US, China overall?
It's important to make a distinction between AI and generative AI or LLMs or agentic AI. Actually, at 55, my team was building AI products for the longest time before it became mainstream, right? But when it comes to the more recent models, I think it all comes down to your strategy. It's certainly the technology is imperfect, but it's improving week after week. Like Anthropic Claude has really just released a new model that is apparently mind blowing. Haven't tested it just yet, but again, most of the time it's not so much about the technology that it is about the people and the change management and the user adoption. I've got a lot of examples of companies who put the cart before the horse. Who've got a really shiny tool spending quite a large amount of money on either SaaS or hyperscalers without having a proper library of use case that for example, a new hire can read through and apply from day one, right? You can certainly deploy some use cases at the surface of how your company operate, but I think the real value is when you really rewire your company through AI. So you basically do a full process reengineering, identifying the tasks that could be streamlined or automated or delegated to an agent. And this is really where you start to see the value. But to be honest, it's certainly easier to do in a smaller organization than in a large multi-market, multi-brand group. That would certainly take more time. There are more people involved. We all know the impact it can have on actual jobs as well. So you don't want to put your company upside down, right? You still need to make sure that your company can operate day to day. So I think it will take more time than most analysts think. There will be disruption. There is disruption in some categories of companies or jobs. But when we look at the larger scale of things, I think it will take quite a bit of time.
Came to my understanding that in China, especially given the central strategy around AI and technology and technological sovereignty, that companies, even sizable ones, are pushing very, very hard and fast in the AI adoptions in their business model. And like you mentioned, when companies are large, it's slower, it's more difficult. But I would almost tend to say in Western companies, how would you explain that difference in adoption?
There's a cultural aspect to it. I've been following a bit what's happening in the US and Europe as well. People demonstrating against data centers, for example, and teachers signing petition letters against a wider AI adoption in teaching methods, and also surprisingly, also fresh grads pushing back on adoption in their firm. In China, and I was in Yunnan just last week again. It's a very different approach. I think very different take from consumers and professionals when it comes to AI for sure. There's certainly a push from the top. An example is the fact that AI is being widely adopted in schools from the younger age. So it's not seen as a threat, but as an opportunity if wisely deployed, wisely used, and if certainly are also trained on how to use those new tools properly. But it also comes from, I think, the general mindset of risk taking in China. It was not so long ago that a lot of Chinese companies were only looking at the domestic market, and then the economy is not doing so great. So, we need to change gear. We need to get into new markets. So there's this renewed energy, I would say, in China for building businesses, going export and the likes. And yeah, I think it's both coming from the top and the bottom of the society. And to be honest, when I look at Europe, between the US and China, we certainly have very good strengths, such as a lot of nuclear energy to power those data centers, for example. But at the same time, there's a certain inertia from the top and a certain risk aversion from the bottom. And I think that's not helping.
That's interesting. That's to see how things will unfold. It will also depend on the whether AI and agentic will give a competitive edge either to Chinese firms, either to smaller scale companies, and whether they can disrupt their own markets. But how do you see that? So do you see that it will ultimately be not only disrupting when it comes to jobs, but also when it comes to market positioning moat that has been potentially existing for decades and that can be disrupted very quickly? How do you see that?
I don't think AI is just a driver of productivity. It certainly is. As I say, if the productivity bar raises for everyone, then you still have the same competitions. So really, the value is about creating that competitive edge through AI. It requires much more effort, certainly in terms of rethinking how to operate your business. But at the end of the day, beyond summarizing your email or drafting PPT, it's AI for product development, for example, or shortening your release cycles, for example. It can also be about doing market research at light speed through digital twins, for example, because you don't have to wait for 2, 3, 4 months to get your survey results, for example. So when you are the only one in your industry doing so, then you have a huge edge. Certainly, your competitors will catch up at some point, but this is a competition play. It's not a productivity play only. Certainly, I don't think a lot of senior leaders really grasp the scale of that change. And to be honest, I was a bit dismissive when at conferences people would say all the time, if you don't change, then you'll be out. I don't think it was that true for point solution in ad tech or marketing tech. But this time is different. I mean, the scale and the depth of change that is coming will reshuffle the competitive landscape for sure.
I have a take. I'd be interested to know what you think about it. I do feel that Chinese companies, and you touched on that already when it comes to the mindset and the culture, but it does seem that the surge of AI is playing in the favor of the Chinese companies, the Chinese players, and the Chinese society overall, not because of, the way it's built and the price, but more about how you think in terms of business model, how you think about ecosystem, how you think about a holistic organization and strategy, any long-term ones, and how it affects all across. And that mindset in terms of business models, that you do not aim to win in a segment, but you aim to have a strategy where you win in a segment because you have a long-term 5-10 years plan when you win on all segments, and you need to climb the value chain and you need to play at scale. I do have the feeling this is how you should play with AI, how you need to think about AI on a more holistic view and a scale and a change and shift of a business model, and also being much more agile and fast at scale. And I think the Chinese have an edge in terms of this way of thinking.
Yeah, I agree with you. Again, back to the the risk aversion that I would see at the moment in Europe, generally speaking, there's this energy in China that pushes you to just try and launch and improve along the way. Certainly, there will be failures, but it's not about having, meetings and laying down the perfect plan and making sure that, every single dollar will have ROI. Certainly ROI is a very sensitive topic in China at the moment, but there's still this flexibility in launching new products and improving as it goes. To give you an example of, how things compare with Europe, there's already a huge number of digital services that are interconnected. When you want to, I don't know, buy something on Weixin or rent a power bank, for example, then it would pull your social score, so you don't have to set a deposit instead. That type of interconnectivity between different companies and different products, I think it's something that Chinese companies are really good at, like building partnership across sectors and across industries. I think there's another aspect that we should mention about China's and the speed of AI adoption. I think they have something that Europe don't have, which is funding. Well, the US has a lot of funding, private funding mostly. I mean, the US government is spending a lot as well, but we know how big their deficit is. So not sure how long that might last. But Europe has limited private funding and pretty much dried up public funding. So that's actually a big issue when we know how much that infrastructure investment require, and it's not that much of an issue in China in terms of mobilizing the funds for the companies, the private sectors, and the public, the state-owned companies as well, certainly.
And I'd like you to get back to your experience at 55 and guide me through the challenges you might have faced, both from a technical standpoint. I think the technical ecosystem and digital ecosystem in the region is quite different here, but also when it comes to understanding the speed of how things should operate and dislikes, and how you overcome to actually.
We had to learn by doing in some markets, for sure. I think the key was to hire people who knew their local market as well. So we opened in Shanghai and then Shenzhen, so we hired locally, same in Taipei. And then actually most of the teams were, local talents. And I think that's really important to really understand or really have this, this proximity with your prospects, your leads, your customers, your partners. When it comes to technology, as you know, a few years ago, China for the first time established data as an asset for the country. That's how the PIPL and the cybersecurity law came into place. And certainly that caused a lot of concerns for our clients, both Chinese companies and foreign ones, because they had to pretty much re-platform their whole tech stack. So that's something that we help them with. Just to give you an example, switching from Google Analytics to a local Chinese tool, but there are many other examples of that. And so it's not only about the technology, but then you have to retrain your team, migrate some of your use cases, and also explaining to your HQ that, well, now we're using different tools, so we might have similar KPIs, but the definitions are different. So that might explain why that number is going up, or why it's not matching with your own records and the like. So it's additional time to educate and to train end users as well. So that kept us quite busy in China and in the years following those new laws. But honestly, I understand why those laws are in place, and Europe has something even more stringent with the GDPR and the associated privacy regulations. And although it can be heavy at times and relatively expensive for companies who might not have budgeted that type of thing, it's actually forces you to rethink how you build your relationship with your customers. Certainly, there were some abuse about how data and how much data is collected and utilized, and for very interesting use cases, to be honest, from a corporate standpoint. But then, yeah, at some point, you've got to draw a line in the sand, I think. Yeah, can't hear you.
How do you deal with the reaction, or let's say, reaction of the headquarter of your counterparts dealing with China? Do you deal with frustration? Do you deal with understanding or excitement? And when we mention things that are different, that are unique to China, it often also leads to frustration and also impatience. Or is it something that you experienced? And if yes, how did you deal with that? And did it affect the general business?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that as consultants, we both worked with their HQ of our customers and their teams in China, in Shanghai or else. And over the years, there was something that we kept hearing about. It is the fact that HQ again wants to know everything about what we're doing in China, and sometimes even going as far as telling us what to do. But I think there's, in some companies at least, this distrust between HQ and their China team. Certainly because of the fact that they use different tools, and certainly the language is not helping. There's a bit of a disconnect into how the information is shared in both ways, actually. And so again, I think it's important to have this level of trust, letting the people on the ground to do their job, and also judging by the results, right? They're certainly closer to your customers. They're certainly more up to date with the latest trends and developments and features on Weixin, for example, or Little Red Book, or the latest live streaming trend, for example. That would take probably 1, 2, 3 months at best to be featured in the media in Europe. So the speed is different. And that's why I think you need to take the time to find a leader in China that, you really can trust. There's no way you can micromanage anyone in China, and certainly not from 10,000 kilometers away. So, but again, spend some time with your team in Shanghai, go to the shops, go to the boutiques, and try to get that feel of what's really happening in this market, because it's unlike anything else you know.
What are the opportunities you feel for international companies, especially in a consulting or technological space, given the cost and also the speed of the Chinese players?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think our biggest challenge in China was price, because we had a fairly premium positioning that worked well in pretty much all markets except China, where a lot of clients started to lowball us. Sometimes processes being led by the procurement team, even with customers who had been working with us for several years. Then suddenly you have a simple choice. Either you slash your price by 20-25%, or we start working with your competitors. So it's a difficult decision to make, because certainly you don't want to devalue your value proposition, and certainly within the next week, all of your other customers in market will know about it, because people will talk and recommend agencies and consultants to one another. But at the same time, are you ready to write off $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? Right. So yeah, it's a tough market to grow. I think there's still opportunity, but I wouldn't go alone. I would build a joint venture if I can bring something unique to the market. I would maybe target China export companies, so Chinese companies headquartered in China, but who are essentially targeting other markets like in Southeast Asia or Europe, because you have that unique knowledge about foreign markets that they don't, plus expertise in products and technologies that they don't. So that might be your edge. But certainly that will not be your most profitable market.
What should be the strategy, and what would be the reason then for international companies to be in the region? Then what will be the main drivers if profitability is a little bit more difficult?
Yeah, so you have to think about where to start your regional HQ and where and when to hire in market. As I like to say, the companies who are most successful are the ones who are slow to hire and fast to fire. It's tough to say, but in the current context, especially, consulting firms and agencies are suffering, and certainly, our clients as well are very careful about how they spend the money. So that being said, markets in the region have a lot of potential for foreign firms. I'll give you the example of Taiwan, a market that is often overlooked, but is typically underserved in some parts of the technology spectrum. At least that was the case for 55 when we opened. That was maybe 7 years ago. And a lot of global companies, major global companies, are actually Taiwanese. Giant, Asus, BenQ, MSI, and also domestic firms, banks, Cathay Bank, for example, Uni-President in retail. I mean, huge potential clients that are investing in AI and tech and digital transformation as a whole. So just to give you an example, but APAC has a lot of potential if you can control your cost base. And if you can also build fruitful partnership with people who are in market, and if you can find people you can trust to lead your operations.
Coming to APAC, therefore, maybe you can give us a little bit of a map of where to start, why in different scenario. What maybe Shanghai, Shenzhen, Tokyo, or Hong Kong, or Singapore, KL. How would you see the major differences there? As you mentioned, this is a very diverse region, and under which condition one city would make more sense?
Okay, so at some point you will need to have people in market, pretty much in every market, even if it's just one person who speaks the language and can be your person on the ground. And for a lot of our customers, that was actually a requirement to sign a contract, right? Someone who they can talk to in the local language, and then be that liaison with other offices, be it in Singapore or in Hong Kong. Where I would start in Hong Kong for the number of reasons that I've mentioned previously, plus another really good reason, which is geographical location. It's simply the best city to travel in the region, whether you have a pitch in Seoul or a partner meeting in Tokyo or a pitch in Singapore. Pretty much everything is within reach. Whereas if you are in Singapore, it's great for Southeast Asia, but it's very far from pretty much everything else. Same in Tokyo or Seoul for the rest of APAC. If China mainland is your ultimate goal, certainly you need to be in market. So that's either Shenzhen if you are in tech and AI and products or hardware, or Shanghai if you are aiming at retail and brands like beauty, luxury, and the likes. After that, so the question is, do you see enough traction outside of Hong Kong to justify a new hire? I've always built pragmatically, and certainly you can go a little faster by having local partners in the interim. But really the question is, where is the sweet spot or the break even, at least, to justify a local hire? And so you could absolutely wait until you have your first contract. I've got many examples of signing contracts in countries where we had no one on site, including Tokyo and Seoul. Certainly you have to be really good in terms of getting and winning RFPs. But this is only after that milestone that you would decide for a local hire. This is my approach.
Maybe to close for a last note, what should we wish you for, and what do you hope to achieve in the next step of your career? You achieve quite significantly from entrepreneurial to corporate and to a mix of both. And how do you look at your future next step?
Yeah. So I really enjoyed, building and scaling 55 from, well, pretty much not exactly zero, but probably from 1 to 100. And, I've got the playbook, I've got the network. I know, probably some of the mistakes to avoid, and can save a lot of time as well. So a similar journey with a US or European company who has ambition for APAC. I think that's what I enjoy most.
And no plan to relocate to Europe or to France?
No, I don't think so. Certainly, I'll spend a bit of time off next month with the family, but I'm always very happy to go back to Hong Kong and Asia.
Cedric, thank you for being on the show. That was great to impact your experience and insights on the region and when it comes to AI and also consulting firms in the region in Asia. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me.
Thank you for listening to Leaders in Motion. And if you want to go further, join the Leaders in Motion Academy, our executive program. The first step is simple. Subscribe to our newsletter in the show notes, and you'll get access to our exclusive insights and all the details about the Academy. This podcast is produced by Melanie Hong, who helps leaders and organizations create strategic podcasts. I'm Kevin Hong, and see you next time.